discuss this with our panel of experts. Joining me on Global Lens tonight, Dan Pfefferman, who's formerly been with the Israeli Defense Forces and is currently Executive Director at Sharaka, joins us live from Israel. Ambassador Suresh Goyal, former Indian diplomat, joins us from New Delhi, as does Dr. Rajan Kumar, Associate Professor at the School of International Studies at the Jawaharlal Nehru University. Gentlemen, welcome to Global Lens. Ambassador Goyal, let me start with you. Now, this is not the first time, as we know, that President Biden has sharply rebuked Prime Minister Netanyahu quite publicly. On one occasion, he issued an ultimatum to Netanyahu saying Israel needs to mend its ways or else. Now in this interview, he says Netanyahu's approach is a big mistake and there is no excuse for not allowing humanitarian aid. While Biden has consistently been making these noises over the last several weeks, what I find far more interesting than this is how Biden himself seems to be under tremendous pressure at home over his support to Israel. And you know, while it is well known that many Democrats have expressed their discomfiture, including the likes of Nancy Pelosi, over the Biden administration's support in recent months, what is now coming to light is even more interesting. These letters that have been written and the messages on Telegram and Signal and WhatsApp being posted by both current and former US government officials expressing how unhappy and frustrated they are with the Biden administration's support to Israel. Many have said that even after all these statements that he has made, President Biden has simply not gone far enough. It's as if, you know, he's just ticked a box. There are others who are saying that it is too little too late. What Biden told Netanyahu last week should have been said months ago, and perhaps the Palestinians in Gaza would not be facing a famine-line situation today. And then there are others who say that, you know, both European governments as well as the US administration may now actually be guilty of being complicit in some grave violations of international laws which they accuse Israel of. What do you make of this growing pressure that President Biden seems to be facing at home with the US presidential election now just months away?
Yeah, thank you very much. And the drama unfolds. As we see now happening in Washington and in Europe and in Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu, President Biden. When I was in New York and we used to see these debates, endless debates going on in the United Nations on various issues, some useful, some perfunctory, some, but always very, very long. We used to call them a drama. And dramas are an essential part of the diplomatic life. And therefore, it is interesting for me to see how the drama is unfolding in Washington. I'm a diplomat, but let me ask a few questions on the basis of the ground reality. And for once in a while, I think we need to face what the realities are. Just stare the realities starkly in the face. And then we can go on to the diplomacy. Now, President Biden, who is facing elections this year, has suddenly realized that the humanitarian situation in Gaza is dismal and something has to be done, and that Israel cannot go on with the war like this. Is it a realization after 6 months of war? Or is it the first time that the violation of human rights have taken place? Have 33,000 Palestinians died overnight or within a week? Or the images of broken, run-down buildings torn down by the bombs, the hospitals being shaken down to the bricks, completely broken down, people dying in the hospital. Has it happened over only last 1 week? So what has changed? To my mind, two things. One, that suddenly the election in the USA has begun to warm up. And President Biden realizes, like President Trump or any other candidate, that Arab and Muslim votes are as important to them as the Jew lobbies are. So, what to do under the circumstances? While there is no president in the USA who can expect to get elected to the office without the support of the Jew lobbies, who basically control a lot of money in USA, but at the same time, they cannot, and the least of all, the Democratic Party cannot afford to ignore the Arab and the Muslim vote. And when something of this kind is happening in Gaza over the last 6 months, and the Arabs and the Muslims don't even come to the White House iftar, then there is something seriously wrong. And therefore, this situation has to be addressed. Whether it is done temporarily till the elections or after the elections is entirely a different matter. And then on the top, Israel does the mistake of attacking the convoy of the central kitchen uh, despite clear markings. And suddenly there is a huge furor. Before that also, UNRWA convoys have been attacked. There has been a lot of humanitarian help which has been attacked. Palestinians have been killed in the queue while trying to collect the humanitarian support help. And suddenly there is a huge fear, and Netanyahu himself goes to admit that yes, there was a mistake. The mistake was not attacking the envoy. Oh, sorry, the convoy. The mistake was in attacking a convoy which was commanded by the Europeans and the Americans. And therefore, the loss of any American life becomes a huge issue in the election year in the USA. So this is the reality which I see on ground. 30,000 people have died in Palestine. And I'm calling it Palestine because basically Palestine has been recognized by the United Nations as an observer state, even if not as a member. Most of the countries, many countries do recognize Palestine as a state. Whichever shape it is in, two-state theory was the basis on which Israel was recognized in 19 or gained the recognition of India in 1991 as a diplomat. And now we are seeing that Prime Minister Netanyahu clearly says that he will not accept the two-nation theory or the two-state theory. So I think I've said enough. The problem really here is not Gaza. The problem really here is the elections now coming up in the USA, and therefore all efforts have to be made to get the votes one way or the other. Until that election is settled, I think we will continue to see the balance going one way or the other way. But I don't think Gaza situation is going to be resolved over the next 6 months because Netanyahu has clearly indicated that he has fixed the date for attack on Rafah. So we have to wait till that happens and Gaza is completely finished.
All right, this war is not ending anytime soon, says Ambassador Goel. In fact, there is some update that we have coming in. Media reports say that an Israeli air attack on Gaza has killed at least 3 sons and 3 grandchildren of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh. Of course, Israel has claimed from the beginning that they are going after Hamas terrorists. However, fact of the matter is that as we speak, over 33,000 Palestinians are dead in this war that has gone on for over 6 months now. Okay, let me go across to our Israeli guest, Dan Pfefferman, at this point. Dan, you know, we're talking about how on one occasion after another in recent weeks, President Biden has sharply and publicly rebuked Prime Minister Netanyahu over his handling of the Gaza war. Earlier, he issued an ultimatum to Netanyahu saying, mend your ways or else. Now he's calling Netanyahu's approach a big mistake and saying there is no excuse to not lead humanitarian aid into Gaza. But what is quite significant is the kind of pressure that President Biden now seems to be facing at home, not just from Muslim Americans, but from a very large number of Democrats, including multiple former and current US government officials who have been writing at various forums expressing their unhappiness over the Biden administration's support to Israel. And I'd like your thoughts on, this letter, this open letter that was written in the month of February by hundreds of civil servants in both the United States and multiple European countries, warning that their respective governments risked being complicit in grave violations of international law. And they said that the seriousness of the Gaza war pushed these people, career civil servants, to publicly air their concerns. This might be unprecedented in many ways. We've been talking for weeks now about Israel's growing isolation in the world over this war. But what is quite clear now is that even the man who has unstintingly supported Netanyahu so far, President Biden himself, seems to be in a lot of trouble over his support to Israel, especially with US elections around the corner. What do you make of it? Doesn't it clearly reflect how much anger there is around the world, including in the United States, over Israel's war?
Yeah, I find it the epitome of Western hypocrisy and superiority when, in 9/11, when attackers from Saudi Arabia and other parts of the Middle East killed thousands of Americans in what was then the worst terrorist attack in history, the United States invaded Afghanistan, thousands of miles away, where the leadership of that terrorist organization were hiding. They then proceeded to invade Iraq, which it turns out had nothing to do with those terrorist attacks. And they also targeted militants and ended up killing 500,000 people between Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iraq in attacks that certainly were not from countries neighboring on the United States. And in the case of Iraq, which actually had nothing to do with the attacks on the United States. And so I find it incredibly hypocritical that any country would dare criticize what Israel is doing to defend itself against the murderous terror organization that is literally on its borders, that invaded Israel's border, sovereign border, on October the 7th. It's shocking to me that the world has seemed so quickly to forgotten the events of October 7th. It's shocking to me that the world seems to ignore every single ceasefire offer that is presented to Hamas that Hamas rejects. And what is Hamas saying? It wants to go back to the ceasefire that, I have to remind you and your viewers, was in place on October 6th. So what was the point of the October 7th massacre of 1,200 Israeli civilians in their homes, in their beds, at a music festival on October 6th, if all they want to do is go back to the status quo that was on October 6th? Israel cannot allow this murderous, genocidal terrorist organization to remain in existence. And anything that the United States, generally our best friend in the world, or any other country says is either out of sheer hypocrisy and playing to local politics, or out of complete ignorance and a lack of moral courage, a lack of a moral spine, a lack of any kind of moral sensibility. What would India do, I have to ask you, if your neighbor conducted such a brutal terrorist attack on India's borders? And I can assure you that India would take the necessary steps to defend itself, and Israel would not be among those criticizing India's right to defend itself. I find it absolute sheer hypocrisy. I find it cowardice in the face of local politics. And I find it an absolute 180-degree about-face on the part of President Biden and his administration, who should know better. They know that Israel is not the impediment to aid getting into Gaza. The impediment is Hamas itself denying that aid be distributed inside Gaza. And I just find it absolutely shocking and just a complete show of hypocrisy.
All right, some very strong words there from Dan. A couple of points to you, Dan, before I take this to our Indian guest. Number one, you talked about what would India do if it faced a similar terror attack. Let me tell you, India has been at the receiving end of cross-border terrorism exported by our neighbor Pakistan for years and decades now. And yes, while India does reserve the right to defend itself, and we have done that on multiple occasions, I must point out here that we haven't gone around butchering civilians. We had 26/11.
We don't go on butchering civilians. We don't target civilians.
Let me
Hamas
finish.
hides itself in a civilian infrastructure. And the one thing I have to say this, and this is just, it's so hypocritical on the part of all the talk on the media these days. I haven't seen one country stand up, let alone the entire international community, condemn Hamas, demand Hamas lay down its arms,
Actually,
can be
I
expelled
disagree
to
very
Qatar or another
strongly,
country,
Dan.
and
I'm,
give back the hostages.
Okay, I have to disagree with you very strongly there, because I don't know which media you're referring to. I can speak for myself, I can speak for the Indian media, and any media that I have seen so far, whether here in India or in Asia or the West, I don't know which media organization has ever either defended Hamas or not condemned it and not condemned what it did on the 7th of October. I have personally done dozens of shows right here on this channel strongly condemning what happened on the 7th of October as nothing but naked terrorism. That was also the stand of the government of India, with Prime Minister Narendra Modi issuing that statement hours after the attack of the 7th of October. But yes, just to tell you and our viewers that we did have 26/11 Mumbai terror attacks in 2008, which have been singularly the worst terror attacks that India has ever seen. We did not bomb Pakistan back to Stone Age. I just want to put that, on record. But and also we have to remember here that while what happened on the 7th of October is horrific, 1,200 innocent Israeli lives lost, what we also have to take into account is the fact that more than 33,000 Palestinians have been killed in these 6 months. We cannot say that Palestinian lives do not matter, that only Israeli lives matter.
No,
I know you said that we are going after Hamas,
13,000 of those are Hamas fighters. 13,000 of those are Hamas fighters.
Okay, that is your version versus the version of
That's
the
the
Hamas-run
official
health
version.
ministry. However, the figures put out by the Hamas-run health ministry have
I'm
also
glad
been
you're taking
accepted.
the account of a
No,
terrorist
they have
organization over
also
that of
been
a democratic
accepted.
country.
These figures have also been accepted by President Biden, by the United States of America, and they are your staunchest
Hamas
allies. So you
doesn't
should first be
differentiate
questioning
between
them.
civilians and
You
combatants.
should be
A third
questioning
of those
them.
killed are combatants.
However, having said that, Dan, I do agree with you on the point of Western hypocrisy and American hypocrisy, and therefore I want to take this to Dr. Rajan Kumar. Dr. Rajan Kumar, when we talk about Western hypocrisy, it is well known that after 9/11, not only did they not only did the United States invade Afghanistan, we also know about the infamous invasion of Iraq, when they talked about the non-existent weapons of mass destruction that were obviously never found, and the fact that even to eliminate Osama bin Laden, the mastermind of 9/11, I beg your pardon, they entered Pakistan, and the entire operation to eliminate him was carried out in Abbottabad. These are very well-known facts. But there is another, kind of hypocrisy and doublespeak that America is being accused of. On the one hand, President Biden goes on saying how his heart breaks when he sees civilians being killed in Gaza. And he is now repeatedly accusing Netanyahu of getting it all wrong. But what about the fact that most of the missiles and bombs that are killing Palestinians in Gaza are being provided to Israel by the United States of America? Let's look at this important fact. Washington annually provides a $3.8 billion package of military assistance to Israel. And there is, on the cards, a potential sale of $18 billion worth of F-15 fighter jets. Clearly, President Biden has failed to walk the talk.
Thank you, Neha, for having me here. Very provocative arguments given by the previous speaker. And, if Israel believes in a rule of law and Israel is a democracy, I do think that Israel, at least the majority of the people do believe in the rule of law. And by that standard, what Israel has done in the last few months, that is complete violation of international law. Israel is the only country probably in the world where, the entire sympathy was with Israel after the 7th October attack. But suddenly, very soon, Israel lost all the international sympathy, to the extent that very recently, just a few days back, United Nations Security Council passed a resolution where 15 members, 5 permanent, and you have 10 non-permanent members. Out of that, only United States abstained, and the rest of the countries, they voted against Israel. And the kind of official argument that was coming from Israel, it said that United Nations has become anti-Zionist. So that kind of argument shows that how the Israeli politics and how Israeli perception had changed in the last few years is completely controlled by a very hardcore right-wing politics, and the way Israel views itself, it has completely isolated itself in the world, and that does not support, in fact, Israel. And it is in that context that the Biden's statement is coming, and you're talking about the Western hypocrisy. That's absolutely right. When it comes to actually putting pressure on Israel, the pressure which will work, the reason why America is not putting any pressure, because of 2-3 reasons. The first, America is a declining part today. America knows that if it has to pursue its policy in the Middle East, it does not want to be in the Middle East the way it invaded Iraq. So the US is not in position to do that. So it has certain proxies in the Middle East, and Israel is certainly one of that. The reason why this Israel is working without any kind of fear, without any kind of accountability and responsibility, there are 3 reasons in my view. First is the principle of indispensability, where Israel believes that irrespective of what it does against Palestine or Gazan civilians, no action would be taken. There is a zero consequence policy pursued by the United States. It says that you are making the mistake, but when it comes to pushing Israel for certain kind of consequences, America is not willing to take any action. Just yesterday, I was listening to the interview of Cameron and Secretary Blinken, and they all said that that they are not going to take action against Israel. Forget about taking action; they are not even willing to stop the supply of weapons to Israel. So that's number one.
Not even placing conditions on arms transfers. Forget about anything else.
Absolutely, and the US is not putting pressure on this arm transfer issue. The second is that it is, even when it comes to narrative, entire international community today is saying that what it did against the aid workers, the Central Kitchen aid workers, that comes very close to genocide. But US clearly said, the Defense Secretary clearly said that
no evidence of genocide.
No evidence
As a matter of fact, repeatedly this matter has gone before the International Court of Justice, with South Africa and certain other countries also accusing Israel of genocide, and yet the US continues to actually stand firmly in the corner of Israel, saying no evidence of any genocide.
Absolutely.
All the anger seems to have been sparked only by the killing of these foreign aid workers, and I'm not suggesting that their lives were not precious, but really, do Palestinian lives not matter? I think is a question that really we need to ask ourselves.